Could you please tell us your name, birth date, branch of service, and highest rank you received in the Army?
My name is Rob Braido. I was born May 12, 1945 on Mother's Day. And I was in the Army and I attained the rank of sergeant.
Where were you born?
Chicago, Illinois.
And what was your parents' occupation?
My parents' occupation, my father was a machinist, and during World War II he had cancer, but he survived. And because he couldn't join in World War II, he was making torpedoes for the Navy. So, and my mother was worked in a factory until I was born. So,
Do you have any brothers and sisters?
yes, I have one brother who is 2.5 years younger than me.
What were you doing before you entered the service?
I had an associate degree in electrical engineering, and I was working in a manufacturing plant that made commercial printed circuit boards and electronics. And I was a supervisor, working supervisor on the floor, and that's when I got my draft notice.
Did you have any other family members that served as well?
No, I had no other family members. My granddaughter, current granddaughter, and her husband is in the Marines, and we just returned from Camp Lejeune to visit them.
Were you drafted or did you enlist?
Well, I was drafted, but there's an interesting story to that. Before I got drafted, I wanted to get into the Navy Air Corps at Glenview Naval Air Station. I went there, did all of the testing, and they were waiting to bring me into Navy Air before I would get drafted. And then I would be in the Navy. OJT, which meant on-the-job training. I would be training people in electronics and so forth because of my degree. But the Army got me before the Navy Air did.
Can you tell us about your departure and early days of the training camp?
Yeah. My early days of departure and training camp were pretty normal to any other deployment. I was married for 10 months when I got my draft notice. It was a difficult time because did not want to leave my new wife. I was still on my honeymoon. That was the most difficult part. In getting on the train and going downtown and all those other things. I ended up at Fort Leonardwood, Missouri for basic training. And during training, I was given orders at the end of the training for being a dental technician. And that was kind of crazy because I had an associate degree in electrical engineering, but okay, I'd rather be a dental technician. But then after about 12 hours, everyone's orders got rescinded, and President Johnson had put an order through for all troops to go into infantry and be sent over to Vietnam. But if I want to backtrack just a little bit, when I was in the induction center in Chicago, and they had us count off by threes, and they told the ones and twos to stand to one side and the threes to stand to the other side. The ones and twos were going into the Army, and the threes ended up in the Marines. So I was one number away from going into the Marines, but that's okay too. No matter which one it was, that would have been fine.
So in the training camp, did you receive any specialized training?
in boot camp, it's basically real basic training of weapons, warfare, tactics, training to build up your muscles and so forth with running and all different types of calisthenics, so forth. But a lot of it was just basic tactical and weapon training.
What was it like adapting to military life?
I was pretty much a rule keeper, so in being in the military is they break you down to everyone's got the same haircut, everyone wears the same lovely green outfit, and everybody looks the same. So and everybody does what they're supposed to do. You know, you're given rules and you abide by them. So that was it. My wife and the wife of a friend of mine came down to watch us graduate. And as we graduated, right before we graduated, they gave us orders that we had to jump on a bus and, you know, take off, you know, to our next assignment, which was jungle training. So.
Where did you serve?
I served in Vietnam for a year, but let me take you back to go to when we got on those buses. We went to jungle training in Fort Polk, Louisiana. They called it advanced infantry training, but we were working in the swamps of Louisiana, so we kind of thought of it as our jungle training before we went to Vietnam. There was more tactics, more weapon training, evasion training in case you were separated from your unit and you were trying to avoid the enemy. There was more rigorous training of abilities to withstand pressure in all different types of situations. So served in Vietnam for a year, and it was an intense time. I served with the 1st Air Calvary Division, which, and the unit I was in was Custer's Cav, because the cavalry goes back to the days of the Old West when they formed the cavalry. And they fought in the Spanish-American War, they fought in First World War, the Korean War, and of course Vietnam. So it was a long tradition unit that I was sent to.
Can you give us any details on your trip abroad?
Some of this I can tell you. You know, for a good portion of the time when I got there, every person took turns at walking point. And walking point is the first person in line of a long line of troops, in different platoons. And you have to take a look to make sure that you're not stepping on a landmine, a booby trap or whatever. So walking point is a very difficult thing because of most likely one day you're going to walk into an ambush, and that was a very difficult situation to deal with every day if you're walking point. There were times when about 3 months in, they asked me they asked everyone if anyone wanted to volunteer. Well, no one volunteers for anything in the service. But if it could get me out of walking point, I would do it. So that's what I did. And there was 2 others. There was 3 of us. And they said, okay, you don't have to walk point, but what you will be doing is you'll be carrying 40 pounds of plastic explosive, 1 pound bars, and detonating cord, blasting caps, so forth. So we did get some training in using plastic explosives. And in using the plastic explosives, it was to explode or detonate bombs that had dropped from aircraft that didn't explode. There were other situations where there were rat holes where the enemy would use these tunnels underground, so we'd blow those tunnels. We'd also have to repel out of a helicopter into the jungle and blast or clear the jungle of trees so that helicopters could land. That was kind of dangerous because you didn't know what was down there. There could be enemy all around. That was a kind of a tough situation to be in at times. I was also put on a 50 caliber machine gun squad. So 50 cal machine gun was used on tanks and on armored personnel carriers. Normally they didn't carry 50 cals. They carried a smaller M60 machine gun, but our commander felt that we ought to have a 50 cal because the NVA, North Vietnamese troops, did not like 50 cal machine guns because they're pretty powerful. So we would carry that through the jungle. You'd have to disassemble it because it was fairly big, but we'd carry that through the jungle. And then carrying the 40 pounds of plastic explosive. Can of ammo was 35 pounds. You carry a couple cans of ammo. You carry the 2 barrels, a receiver, or the tripod, and that in a small squad. So whenever that was needed, you'd bring it up to, it was an ambush or whatever. So those are the things that I kind of did when I was in country. There were other things that were a little more difficult. Some of those we would go and search out if a chopper helicopter went down and there were people on the helicopter. We would try to go and find it. We didn't know if the people were killed. We don't know if the people were injured. And so we would go and try to find those helicopters that were shot down. In one instance, we found one of the survivors, and he guided us to where the helicopter was. But it had been, I'll call it melted down from the jet, for the fuel that they used, and the machine gun barrels were melted down to nothing. The plane had been pretty well melted or eradicated. I mean, there was just a skeleton there. And the bodies were not bodies anymore. They had succumbed to the fire. And so they asked for volunteers to go in and get these men. That was one of the most difficult things because no one was volunteering. I volunteered, and we got a couple more volunteers, and we went in there and we shoveled what was left of the bodies and the remnants into a body bag. And then we carried those body bags until we could get an open area where we could get a chopper in and get those out. I couldn't eat for probably 2 days. I just, my stomach, my head, it was just a real difficult experience. There were other experiences that I've gone through that were real difficult, and that was friends being wounded, friends being killed with you. When you're there, you're with what some people call a band of brothers. Everyone, no matter what your culture, what your skin color, whoever you are, we were one. And that was an important thing for all of us, because no matter what would happen, you could argue, just like a family, you can argue, but if the enemy opened up on you and you were in an ambush, you were taking fire, we were one. Nobody looked to see who was standing next to them. We were back to back, working as hard as we could in order to make sure that we would succeed at overcoming the enemy and taking care of each other. If some, and that whole adage of no one's left behind, and you would make sure if someone got shot or someone was down, people would risk their lives just to bring that body back, bring that person back. We were one. And that's how it went all year long. I remember one instance. It was Halloween night, and we bedded down in a cemetery. And that was kind of interesting, a little funny. We didn't get attacked that night, but that was an interesting thing. We had a lot of encounters with animals, big, huge snakes that we left lay. We didn't want to mess with them, so we'd leave them, wait till they moved on before we moved on. Saw some tigers, saw elephants. Insects were the worst, and we saw so many insects that I didn't even know what they were named, but we fought those as much as we fought the enemy. Those were some of those interesting things that I went through.
What kind of actions did you witness, or what were your duties on the front line?
My duties, I rose from private first class to sergeant. Some of the other things that we did what they call long-range reconnaissance. We would 3 to 4 people would go out on a patrol at night and at dusk and search out the enemy. We'd set up sometimes a listening post so that we were away from the rest of the perimeter of the troops. And in the listening posts, you would listen to the jungle. You'd listen for any metallic sounds, which would be rifle, something that was metallic. You could smell the enemy. They were either smoking pot or they hadn't washed in a long time. You could smell them, so you could radio back that there were enemy out there. But it was kind of a lonely thing because you're out there all by yourself with 2 or 3 other guys that you know, and you could get cut off from the rest of your company. So that was one thing. And then what I had mentioned, Walking Point, and I remember one other duty we had to blow an LZ, a landing zone. It was a large LZ where many troops, artillery were, and they were going to abandon it. So they flew in all of the troops that had training in plastic explosives, other explosives, and we set charges on everything on the whole LZ so that nothing could be used. All the bunkers, anything that was left was put down. And it was like 4th of July, because as we were pulling out on our helicopters, the last helicopter out had set the charge, and you could see it exploding. And it was probably just like a 4th of July. You couldn't believe everything just coming together. One of the other things that remember quite well were what we call the arc lights. If you're laying in the jungle and at night, B-52 bombers in an arc light, which would be in a V, one at the head and then two back in the wings, would go through dropping 500-pound bombs, and we could feel ourselves being just lifted off the ground because they were so close and they were going off in a direction away from us, but where the NVA were. And then in the morning, that's where we would go to see what had happened, look at, try to find what we called Charlie. Where's Charlie today? I think my first firefight, we were on the beach not too far from the South China Sea, and we got ambushed. And and when we were ambushed, and being in my first firefight, I was so scared to death that I let loose of everything, my bowels, everything. And when I pulled myself back together, I was behind a log and started firing my weapon, along with everybody else. But all of the band of brothers that we're with understood that situation. And in understanding that situation, most everyone's probably gone through that same thing. So after the battle, we were on the sand and by the water, and they told me, let's get you cleaned up. And they cleaned me up, or I cleaned myself up with their help, and we moved out. And it's like always being taken care of by your brothers. So there was a strong bond, always a strong bond with everyone. That's about it.
What were your emotions related to combat?
Scared sometimes. And if you weren't scared, if you weren't scared, you were lying to yourself or lying to others. We were all scared. There were times when there was lulls in combat. The thing about combat in Vietnam was that there were no, like in World War II in Korea, there was a line, and we were on this side of the line and the enemy was on the other side of the line. With Vietnam, it was just jungle warfare. So where you were standing is the ground you held today. But if you left, then it was the enemy's tomorrow. So we'd have to fight to regain a position over and over again. If we left it and then a week later they said, we want you to go back over here, then we'd have to fight to regain what we gave up, because there was no lines of demarcation. The thing that was also sad to us was that the enemy was coming down and coming through Cambodia and Laos. And as they would come in, if we would go after them, they'd go back into Cambodia and Laos, and we couldn't go after them. That was kind of detrimental to trying to win a war. It was a political war, so they had sometimes one hand tied behind the back. But it was a difficult thing, in being scared is part of it. I think the other part is making it home. We found that many guys who said, I don't think I'm going to make it, I'm never going to make it, really didn't make it. Most of the guys that said, I'm going to find a way to get home. I mean, I had a wife to go home to. And, you did everything in your power to stay positive. I cleaned my rifle twice a day. Never did you want your rifle ever to jam or something get into it that, because it was always raining. You had the monsoon seasons. In monsoon season, it poured rain all the time. Mud up to your knees or your ankles, always wet. When it wasn't monsoon season or pouring rain, you were always wet. You were always wet from sweat. You were wet from the dew of the night, because the jungles are heavy with dew. So you were always wet. And so because of that, and because the heat and the humidity was always, heat was over 100, humidity close to 100% all the time. So you're fighting not only an enemy, you're fighting insects, you're fighting the weather. So there was times where your mind would kind of flip from fighting an enemy to getting aggravated at the weather. I think that the other thing was that fighting and scare that not everybody that was with you would make it home. And when someone went down, it was hard. It was like a knife in the heart, because this was your buddy, this was your friend. And so it's those types of things that you fight. Besides the scare, you fight a lot of different types of emotions.
What kind of friendships were formed during the war?
We formed as I mentioned earlier, a band of brothers. We were with the 1st Calvary Division, and being with 1st Cav in a lot of the great traditions in the 1st Cav, we became a band of brothers. We were the first unit to be air mobile and to use air mobility to move around with choppers. We would fight, laugh, have a good time together, but we were a family, and we had tight bonds. I'm still in contact with some of the friends from 40 plus years ago. And the one thing that's interesting too, if I wear my Vietnam hat or I see someone else in the service, I'll stop and talk to them. And even if they weren't in the same unit I was in, it was like we were friends automatically. There was always something about that where if you see somebody, you meet somebody that was there in the same places that you were at, there's an instant camaraderie, there's an instant brotherhood that forms. And I know when we go to a store and I see somebody and I tell my wife, I'm going to go talk to that guy. I mean, now I don't even have to say that. I'll just head that way, and she goes on shopping, and I sit and talk to that fella, and half an hour later I'll come back and, you know, finish shopping or whatever. But there's a brotherhood, I think, because of Vietnam. Because when we came home, and I'm sure that some of the questions you have are for later on, when we came home, we were not given a welcome home. We were told that we were baby killers, drug addicts, and so forth. And they threw blood on us and called us every name in the book. Instead of being angry at the government for sending us, they were angry at the troops that were coming home. And I think because of that, the Vietnam veterans have formed a really tight bond. So.
How did you manage to stay in touch with your family and friends at home?
Well, unlike Afghanistan and Iraq and Desert Storm, where there was internet and there was texting and there was cell phones and Skype and so forth, the only contact we had was with letters. My wife would send me letters. My mom and dad, my brother, relatives would send me letters. We wouldn't get letters every day, but when we did get letters, we hoarded them. I mean, we carried them with us. And then when we got a chance, then we would write letters and send them back. But it was the only communication we had with friends out home were just a letter, a piece of paper. And I think that's why we feel so, the veterans from Vietnam feel important, you know, things that are important is, you know, just to be able to communicate with other people.
Can you tell us about your recreation or off-duty pursuits?
Well, when I was there in the infantry, we didn't have any off-duty. We were on 24 hours a day, but as we were on, we were in the jungle. Most of my time was spent, well, the first month or so we spent, you know, along the city of Ankei towards the South China Sea. But for the rest of the first 6 months, we spent along the Cambodian border, and then the second 6 months spent along the Laotian border, fighting in the jungles. About every 4 weeks, we would come back to an LZ where there was artillery, and there was barbed wire around us. It was in the jungle. It was cut out, like a meadow in the middle of a jungle. We would come back about every 4 weeks, and we'd stand what they call stand down for about 3 days. And so we would fix concertina wire. We would run patrols out of there, but we would have a meal out of a mess tent, which is the only time that we were able to get any kind of cooking. And then we would guard duty all around that perimeter in the jungle. Otherwise, the rest of the 4 weeks we were out patrolling in the jungle, and really didn't have any recreation.
Did you return home before the war ended?
Yes, I got home. Vietnam was what they called the 10-year war, and I was in Vietnam in 1968 and 69. So I got home in 69 before the war was over, and went to Fort Lewis, Washington to train troops.
How did you return home?
With great joy. I was wounded when I was there. In about the 9th month of my tour, I was wounded, and didn't think I was going to make it home. There were 3 of us carrying the 50 cal machine gun on a mountain ridge, where the ridge would come down, and there was a small footpath, and then it was a huge drop off. And what we did was we were running up to bring firepower to the platoon that was under fire. And the enemy had shot a rocket, and there was only one tree on this whole ridge, and the rocket hit the only tree as we were right behind the tree, split the tree in half, and as it split it in half, the concussion and the shrapnel had put 3 of us against this mountainside. And we felt that we were dead. I thought that it was white smoke, and as we were in this white smoke, I thought I was in heaven. We had been pushed against this rock wall, and with that I'm screaming for my other 2 buddies, but they couldn't hear me and I couldn't hear them because the impact and the concussion was so loud that it affected our ears. But after a little bit of a while and the smoke had run off, we got to a point where we could see each other. One of the guys had a broken arm and some shrapnel. I thought I had a broken leg and shrapnel to the back. I thought it was a contusion. So they got us off. They got us off that mountain, and the next morning they evacuated us with a helicopter back to a base hospital. And then after some time recovery for 2-3 weeks. Then they sent us back to our company. So
What was your reception by your family and community when you came home?
when I came home, I'm full-blooded Italian, and Italians, they party well, and they, family is important. My mom and dad and my wife had a huge party for me when I came home. I was very excited to get home because they were the only ones that really felt happy for me to be home. When we left Vietnam, there was a quietness in the plane. And after we were out over the ocean, I mean, everyone was happy and talking and enjoying themselves as we were flying home. Made a stop in Hawaii, and then from Hawaii to California. And when we got to the transition, or when we landed from Hawaii to California, you could hear a pin drop in the airplane. I know there was over 300 guys on the plane. You could hear a pin drop. When we landed at Travis Air Force Base, I mean, there was the biggest screaming and excitement that you can imagine. Made it home. When we walked down the ladder on the tarmac, I kissed the concrete, and we got our duffel bags, and we had to go through customs. And as we were walking through, we had to walk along a sidewalk and along a cyclone fence. And on the other side of the cyclone fence, there was protesters. And they threw blood on us. And as I mentioned earlier, they called us every name that they could think of. Baby killers and drug addicts, and you should have died. I mean, there were some really horrific telling us, about our heritage and things like that was not very nice or kind. After we got through customs at the Air Force Base, we were put on buses and we went to a transition center near San Francisco. We were told not to wear our uniforms. They gave us all new uniforms. We went and picked out some civilian clothes, but they told us not to wear our uniforms, even though we were proud of, serving our country. They said don't wear them because you'll encounter the same types of protests that you did when you arrived. So we wore our civilian clothes, but you're carrying an Army duffel bag and you've got no hair on your head. So it's like pretty obvious who you are. But we got midnight flight, two of us, one guy from Milwaukee, Whitey, and myself, got midnight flights to Chicago from San Francisco. When we arrived in Chicago, it was about 5 a.m. in the morning, and I changed into my uniform, and what I wanted to do was surprise my family because I did not tell them I was coming home. Wrong idea. So I went to, my wife was living with her mom and dad. So I went over to their house, and I had my uniform on, and I knocked on the back door. And knocking on the back door, they peeked through the curtains, and my mother-in-law thought that I was a policeman because her husband and one of her sons was working in a construction outfit, and she thought that something had happened to them because they didn't think that I was coming home at that time. And so she screamed, and my wife came running, and they saw me, and they almost fainted. So, they let me in. We talked. We sat down, had a cup of coffee, all of those things. I got cleaned up. I grabbed a quick nap because I wanted to go see my mom and dad. My dad was at work. My mom was at home. And it happened to be on a Monday because my mom was doing a wash. So we drove up, parked the car away from the house, and there was clothes on the line. So I walked down the basement. There's a back basement stairs that you could walk down from the outside. And I walked into the basement, and my mom was behind the washing machine. And I walked up behind her, and I says, "Surprise, Mom, I'm home." And she fainted into my arms. So got her back, and she said, "Don't ever do that again. Why did you surprise us?" Well, I said, I wanted to surprise everybody, let everybody know I was home. And so she called my dad at work. My dad was a machinist, and talked to the supervisor, and he let him come home. And so, we had a great, meal and everything. And then we had a great big party a few days later. And then right after that, a letter came in the mail. And they said, "The letter's for you." And so they said, "Who's it from?" And I opened it up without saying anything, and I opened the letter, and I said, "Oh, it's a letter from me." I sent myself a letter before I had left, just welcoming me home. So it was kind of a crazy time coming home, but very happy to be home.
How did you readjust to civilian life?
Let me take you through a couple of things that happened. I had orders to go to Fort Lewis, Washington, to train troops, and I was a drill instructor, but on an area where it was day and night attacks. So I was in charge of day and night attacks on this range. And I lived off base with my wife, and I was able to get an early out for school, to go back to school. And so I got out of the Army after training troops for about 3 months. I got out 3 months early so I could get into school, and went back to Marquette in Milwaukee to get my bachelor's degree in engineering. And I was able to get out of the Army a little early, able to get back to school and get my degree. But adjusting was very difficult because my first semester back at Marquette, just getting out of the Army, getting back from Vietnam, was a real difficult thing for me to transition from jungle life, eating and living like an animal, to being in a school and taking studies. And there were protests and flag burnings on campus, so that was another difficult thing. I belonged to a veterans club. There was 50 of us that were going back to school on the GI Bill, and there was a number of others that were just taking part-time classes. So we 50 stuck real close together. We did things together. We stayed together. getting out of there, graduating, we had our first son was born the week between finals and graduation, and that was a big joy. Came back to Chicago, had a nice engineering job, and about a year after graduation, we had our second child, and my mom and dad were over at our house, or our apartment, because we lived in an apartment. And the kids were a little messy. Chocolate cake was all over, and food was all over, and how kids are when there's a birthday. And they did something that got me angry. Nothing that should have gotten me angry, but I was angry. And I was screaming at them at the top of my lungs. And my mother started weeping. She was weeping uncontrollably. My dad put his arms around her, was comforting her, talking to her. And she still had tears running down her eyes. And she said something that I would never, ever forget. She said, "My son went to war, and somebody else came home." When I was a young man, before I went into the military, I think I was kind of a gentle soul, very adventurous. When I came home, I had an angry streak there that would come and go. And it took a long time on the journey to figure out what that anger was about. And it had nothing to do with the children, had nothing to do with my wife or anyone else. It was all of that scare, anger, friends being killed, the things I saw, the things I did. And I think those are the things that pierce a person's heart when they go through those things. You can't rise above it when you're going through it. You can't rise above it. You can't be in neutral because you're walking through it. And as you're walking through it, there isn't a day that you can erase any of it. It's something that stays with you forever. But there are ways to understand it, ways to control it. So my way home was a happy event, but as life went on, there were things that happened that would mark my journey to today.
Have you stayed in contact with your fellow veterans, and if so, how?
I have stayed in contact with a lot of the guys that I had was in country with. In fact, I had a phone call about 6 months ago from two veterans that I was in the Vietnam with, and they had told me, they said, we were afraid to call you because you kind of not went out of sight, but when I went back to school and then took a job, and I lived in other parts of the country. And so they said that they had found my number, but were afraid to call because they didn't know if I would want to talk to them. And but after a number of months, they tried to call. I got this call. It was so happy to hear from them. And they called me, and I said, boy, I'm so happy to hear from you guys. And I said, well, we wanted to call you before anything happened, make sure you were alive, make sure that you heard from us before we died, because you saved our lives. And we wanted to thank you. But if you talk to anybody, it was like we just were doing our job. Just like they were. And they would have done the same for me. I want to tell you a little bit about the journey that I've been on, because it has to do with these guys and a few others. Part of that journey, about 19 years after I had gotten married, I went through a divorce. And part of that was just accumulation of wounds from Vietnam and other types of things like that. And I came to find out that over 95% of Marines and combat infantry all went through divorces, which kind of blew me away. There was a night where someone took me to a church, and I call it the Church of the Lost and Found. It was a Christian church, and they just said, we don't care who you are or how you are, what shape you're in, come on in. And because I kind of at a low point after the divorce, and I had gotten laid off from my job after 10 years because 8,000 of us got laid off. They just said, hey, we're merging with this other company and we're going to lay 8,000 people off. So it was kind of at a low point, and that at that time they took me there, and over time I accepted Christ and turned my life around, turned my life around, turned everything around, and because of that, I'm here today. It's been, the last few years, it's been very exciting because we've been able to help other veterans. I belong to a couple of veterans groups, that military care group that takes care of veterans, old veterans and even new veterans. So.
How have your wartime experiences affected your life?
They have affected my life, as I had just mentioned. But one of the things that I think, because of working in a military care ministry and working for Wounded Heroes Ministry, or Wounded Heroes Foundation and other foundations to help all veterans, has given me a lot to be thankful for, and helping others. Right now I'm writing a manuscript of my life. So, and this is a big, the Vietnam part is a big part of it.
What lessons have you learned from your military service?
I think there's as I had mentioned earlier, a band of brothers. Not only all veterans are brothers, men, women, we're all brothers and sisters in an organization. Veterans of all wars. I think I've become more patriotic, more understanding as of late of all the troubles and the struggles that people have. I've learned that I want to give back. No matter what I do, we need to give back. And Randy Travis, country singer, sings about his song. And there's a line in that song where he talks about you can't take things with you. You have to leave something behind. And what I want to leave behind is that legacy of helping people, and making sure that people understand, respect the flag, respect the country, respect the people that are around you, no matter who they are.
And last but not least, I would like to thank you for giving us the honor of interviewing you and for serving our country.
You're welcome, and thank you.